When you're taught from birth that legacy is everything, the discovery that you have none cuts deeper than any blade. That's how Silas Whittaker's fall began. The day his parents summoned the brokers to their estate was the day he understood that bloodlines could be severed by choice. He'd been raised on stories of pack honor, of alphas who valued their sons above gold, of family bonds that could weather any storm. Growing up, he'd believed his father's firm hand on his shoulder meant pride, that his mother's careful grooming meant love, that perhaps his wolf would still emerge strong despite the healer's grim pronouncements about his empty seed. But family was a treacherous thing as it turned out, because when it finally abandons you, you suffer not just the pain of rejection, but the agony of having trusted them at all. The broker's cold eyes gleamed in the torchlight of the Whittaker estate. His leather-bound ledger open like a judge's decree. Silas stood frozen in the grand hall as his father, Ezra Dunham, positioned himself behind him, not as a shield, but as a seller displaying damaged goods. His mother, Abigail Fairfax, watched from beside the marble fireplace, her face carved from ice and disappointment. "The payment will clear your debt to the Thornridge pack," the broker's voice scraped through the silence. "They need laborers, strong backs for the mines. This one will suffice." Ezra's hand landed heavy on Silas's shoulder. Like everyone in their territory, shifter and human alike, his father understood the brutal economics of pack politics. Whispers had spread through the estate about the Whittaker heir's failure, how even the pack physicians had confirmed it. An alpha male was measured by the legacy he could create, the bloodline he could continue. And Silas, he was considered worse than Omega. Born with the Whittaker mark, blessed with his father's strength and his mother's cunning, but cursed where it mattered most. He was his family's shame twice over, first for being infertile, then for being too proud to hide it when his arranged mate exposed him after 3 barren years. The pack had whispered that his defects ran deeper than anyone had known, that perhaps the Whittaker line itself had grown weak. "My lord broker," Ezra's voice carried the practiced smoothness of a merchant, "you understand the terms. Full debt forgiveness. The boy is trained in combat and strategy. He'll serve the Thornridge pack well." The broker's gaze raked over Silas, calculating, dismissing. "A sterile wolf. Your pack must be desperate to breed such weakness." "He's strong enough for labor," Abigail interjected sharply, finally stepping forward. Her eyes, the same gray as Silas's own, refused to meet his. "He won't die easily in the mines. You'll get your money's worth." Silas's body went rigid. Everyone knew what happened to pack members sold to Thornridge. They disappeared into the mountain territories, worked until their wolves gave out, discarded when they broke. The lucky ones died quickly. But before the broker could produce the binding contract, the massive oak doors of the hall crashed open. Cold night air swept through, extinguishing half the torches. And with it came a presence that made even Ezra Dunham take an involuntary step back. The Alpha Queen Eleonora filled the doorway like a force of nature given form. Her armor caught the moonlight, black steel etched with silver runes that seemed to move in the flickering shadows. Behind her, the looming silhouette of Shadow Peak Castle rose against the full moon, its towers piercing the sky like accusatory fingers. "The Thornridge debt," her voice was smoke and iron cutting through the shocked silence, "has been purchased by the crown." The broker's face went pale. "Your Majesty, the contract was negotiated in bad faith." Eleonora's boots echoed against the marble as she strode forward, her royal guard flanking the entrance. "Selling fertile pack members without crown approval violates territorial law. Selling an alpha-born." Her eyes, fierce and golden in the torchlight, fixed on Silas for the first time. "That requires my personal sanction." Ezra found his voice, though it trembled. "Your Majesty, surely you understand. The boy is defective. His bloodline ends." "His bloodline," Eleonora interrupted, now standing directly before Silas, "is not your concern anymore, Ezra Dunham." She reached out, and Silas flinched, but her gauntlet hand was surprisingly gentle as it lifted his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. In her eyes, He saw something he hadn't seen in years. Consideration. Assessment. Not of his body's failure, but of something deeper. "The price Thornridge offered," she said, still looking at Silas but speaking to his parents. "I will triple it. Your debt is cleared. Your shame is purchased." Abigail's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. "You would take him to your court?" "No." Eleanora's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I would take him to my side." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over the family's collective throat. "But he cannot give you heirs." Ezra's composure finally shattered. "Your Majesty, the realm needs." "The realm," Eleanora said, her voice dropping to something deadly soft, "needs what I decide it needs. And I have decided it needs him." Her hand moved from Silas's chin to rest on his bowed head, a gesture that could have been benediction or claim. "Silas Whittaker, you were sold as broken. I'm taking you as whole. The only question is whether you will walk out of this hall as a slave to Thornridge, or as my chosen." For the first time since the broker had arrived, Silas felt something other than shame burning in his chest. Felt dangerously close to hope. And as Eleanora's golden eyes held his, waiting for an answer his parents had never thought to ask for, Silas realized that perhaps some fairy tales weren't lies after all. Perhaps they were just meant for different people than he'd imagined. Silas didn't remember choosing to follow Eleanora. One moment he was standing in his family's grand hall, his parents' faces frozen in masks of shock and calculation. The next, he was walking through the massive oak doors into the moonlit courtyard, the Alpha Queen's royal guard forming a protective corridor around him. Behind him, he heard his father's voice rise in protest, then fall silent. Whether by choice or force, Silas didn't turn to see. The carriage that waited was nothing like the iron cage the Thornridge broker had brought. Black lacquered wood inlaid with silver, drawn by 4 massive wolves whose eyes glowed amber in the darkness. Eleanora gestured him inside with an efficiency that brooked no hesitation, then climbed in across from him. The door closed with a finality that felt like a coffin lid, or a sanctuary gate. Silas couldn't decide which. They rode in silence for the first mile. Through the window, Silas watched his family's estate shrink into the distance, its proud towers and manicured grounds becoming nothing more than a smudge against the horizon. Somewhere in that fading structure, his parents were likely already calculating how to spin this disaster. The son they'd tried to sell had been claimed by the Queen herself. Was that elevation or humiliation? Knowing his mother, she'd find a way to make it both. "You're wondering why," Eleanora said, her voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts. Silas forced himself to meet her gaze. Up close, without the dramatic shadows and firelight of his family's hall, she was even more formidable. Not beautiful in the delicate way his mother prized. Eleanora's beauty was the kind found in storm clouds and drawn blades. Her face was all strong lines and sharper intelligence, her golden eyes missing nothing. "Yes, Your Majesty," he managed. "Good. Questions mean you're thinking." She leaned back against the plush cushions, but her posture remained alert, predatory. "I'll answer one now because you'll need to understand before we reach Shadow Peak. I didn't choose you despite your infertility, Silas Whittaker. I chose you because of what it means." He blinked. "I don't understand." "No. But you will." She turned to look out the window, toward the looming silhouette of Shadow Peak Castle growing larger with each passing moment. "Tell me, have you ever wondered why your parents were so eager to be rid of you? Why not simply keep you as a guard, a strategist, 100 other useful positions?" "Because I'm a reminder of their failure," Silas said, the words tasting like ash. "An alpha heir who can't continue the line is worse than no heir at all. That's what they taught you to believe." Eleanora's eyes slid back to him, and there was something in them that made his breath catch. "The truth is simpler and far more dangerous. Your father is afraid of you, Silas. He always has been." The carriage rolled through the outer gates of Shadow Peak. Even in his turmoil, Silas couldn't help but stare. If his family's estate was a monument to prosperity, Shadow Peak was a testament to power itself. Black stone towers clawed at the sky, bridges and battlements interconnected in a maze of strategic fortification. And everywhere the Queen's banner, a silver wolf on a field of midnight, snapped in the wind like living things. The courtyard they entered was filled with people despite the late hour. Word had clearly spread that the Queen was returning with something. When, as Silas stepped down from the carriage, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes land on him with crushing force. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dead leaves. That's him. Heard he's wolfless. No, infertile. Can't breed. Why would she? Eleanora's hand landed on his shoulder, and the whispers died as if she'd physically cut them down. Come, she said simply, and Silas found himself following her through the parted crowd, through corridors of black stone and silver torchlight, up staircases that seemed to climb into the clouds themselves. They stopped before a set of doors that radiated importance. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral, but Silas caught the flicker of curiosity in their eyes. Eleanora pushed the doors open to reveal chambers that stole what little breath Silas had left. The room was massive, with windows that overlooked the entire kingdom spread below like a glittering tapestry. Furniture of dark wood and rich fabrics, a fireplace large enough to stand in, weapons mounted on the walls with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. This wasn't a guest room. This was a place of honor. These are yours, Eleanora said, watching his reaction. For as long as you remain in Shadow Peak. Your Majesty, I don't deserve. What you deserve and what I give you are entirely separate matters. She moved to a long table where a wooden case rested, its surface carved with ancient runes that seemed to pulse with their own light. Tomorrow, you'll begin your real education. Tonight, you need to understand what you've walked into. She opened the case. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a dagger unlike anything Silas had ever seen. The blade was silver white, almost translucent, with veins of darker metal running through it like frozen lightning. The hilt was wrapped in leather so old it looked petrified, and set into the pommel was a stone that swirled with colors Silas had no names for. This is silver bane, Eleanora said softly. It was forged by the first queen of Shadow Peak, meant for her chosen protector. The one who would stand at her side not as a breeder or trophy, but as her sword and shield. Her eyes met his. It hasn't been wielded in 300 years, Silas. Because there hasn't been anyone worthy. Before he could process that, before he could ask what she meant, voices rose from the corridor outside. Loud, angry, unmistakably confrontational. Absolutely unacceptable. The council must be consulted. The doors burst open. A man strode in with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied entry anywhere in his life. He was perhaps a decade older than Silas, powerfully built, with a kind of aristocratic features that declared his breeding as clearly as any title. His eyes, ice blue and burning with indignation, swept over Silas with open contempt before landing on Eleanora. Your Majesty, he said, his bow perfunctory at best. Surely this is a jest. You cannot seriously intend. Duke Caleb Mitchell. Eleanora's voice could have frozen fire. You will address me properly or you will leave. Immediately. Caleb's jaw clenched, but he straightened. When he spoke again, his tone was barely controlled. Forgive my enthusiasm, Your Majesty. But the entire court is in an uproar. You return with him. He gestured at Silas as if indicating a questionable stain. The Queen chooses a eunuch. This is a national insult. To the crown, to the bloodline, to every able wolf who has served this realm faithfully. Silas felt the words land like physical blows, each one finding the exact places his parents had already carved open. His hand moved instinctively toward his side, toward where a weapon should be. Would have been if he were truly what Caleb was. A warrior, a duke, someone worthy of standing in this room. His fingers brushed against something solid. He looked down. At some point, he couldn't remember when, Eleanora had placed silver bane in his hand. The ancient blade hummed against his palm like a living thing recognizing its master. "You're right, Duke Mitchell," Eleonora said, her voice dangerously soft. "This is an insult. But not to the crown." She moved to stand beside Silas, her presence a wall of absolute authority. "It's an insult to assume I would choose my closest companion based on the opinions of men who measure worth solely by what hangs between their legs." Caleb's face flushed crimson. "Your Majesty, the realm needs." "The realm," Eleonora interrupted, her golden eyes blazing, "needs what I say it needs. And I say it needs him. Get out, Caleb. Before I decide your presence is the true insult here." The Duke stared at her, then at Silas, then back at the Queen. For a moment Silas thought he might push further. But something in Eleonora's expression, something ancient and absolutely unyielding, made him bow stiffly and retreat. As the doors closed, the silence felt heavier than the confrontation had. Silas looked down at the dagger in his hand. At the weapon meant for Queen's chosen protectors. At the blade that hadn't found a worthy wielder in 3 centuries. "Why?" he whispered. "Why me?" Eleonora's hand covered his, warm despite the armor she still wore. "Because you're the only one who will stand at my side for the right reasons, Silas Whittaker. Not for power. Not for legacy. Not for what I can give you." Her grip tightened. "But because you understand what it means to be seen as broken, and still choose to stand." Through the window, Shadow Peak Castle's towers stretched toward the stars, and below them, an entire kingdom whispered about the Queen's impossible choice. Silas held Silverbane, felt its weight settle into his palm like it had been waiting for him all along, and wondered if perhaps being broken had been preparing him for something else entirely. Something that looked dangerously like purpose. Silas woke to find Eleonora standing at his window, silhouetted against the dawn like a sentinel carved from shadow. She hadn't knocked. Hadn't announced herself. She simply was, as if she'd materialized from the morning mist that clung to Shadow Peak's towers. "Get dressed," she said without turning. "It's time you learned why you're really here." 20 minutes later, they descended into depths of the castle Silas hadn't known existed. Stone stairs spiraled down into the mountain itself, lit by torches that burned with strange blue flames. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with something that made Silas's skin prickle. Not quite magic, but not entirely natural either. The chamber they entered was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Maps covered every wall, marked with symbols and notations in languages Silas didn't recognize. At the center stood a table of black stone, and on it lay what appeared to be a web of silver threads, pulsing with sickly light. "Do you feel it?" Eleonora asked, watching him carefully. Silas did. A wrongness that crawled along his spine, whispered at the edges of his consciousness. Like hearing a conversation through thick walls, indistinct but undeniably there. "What is that?" "The bloodweave." Eleonora moved to the table, her fingers hovering above the threads without touching them. An ancient curse woven into the very fabric of pack magic. It feeds on fertility, on the drive to breed and propagate. The stronger a wolf's ability to sire or bear cubs, the more vulnerable they are to its influence. She looked at him then, and Silas saw something in her eyes he'd never expected to see in an alpha queen. Exhaustion. Fear, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. "For decades I've watched my most powerful wolves, my generals, my advisors, my potential mates, slowly fall under its thrall. They become obsessed with legacy, with bloodlines, with breeding the perfect heir. They make increasingly reckless decisions, start wars over territory not for resources, but for the future of the pack. They don't even realize they're being controlled." Silas's mind raced, connecting pieces he hadn't known were part of a puzzle. "My parents. Your father's desperation to secure the Whittaker line. Your mother's shame at your condition." "Yes." Eleonora circled the table, her movements predatory. "The bloodweave amplifies what's already there. Ambition, pride, the primal need to continue one's genetics. It turns wolves into slaves of their own biology." "But I can sense it," Silas said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn like cold sunrise. Because I'm infertile. Because the curse has nothing to feed on in me. Exactly. Eleanora's smile was sharp, proud. The barren, the wolfless, those deemed defective by pack standards. You're all immune. You can see the threads where others see only natural instinct. You can sense when someone's been compromised. She gestured to the pulsing web. This is just a fragment, a piece I managed to capture and isolate. The real blood weave extends across the entire kingdom, invisible to anyone who can breed. It's been growing for generations, and now it's reaching critical mass. If I don't stop it soon, every fertile wolf in my realm will be nothing but a puppet dancing on strings of their own desire. Silas stared at the silver threads, watching them pulse and writhe like living things. Why now? Why have you waited until I was desperate enough to choose a mate the entire court considers worthless? Eleanora's laugh was bitter. Because 3 weeks ago, I discovered that I'm not immune either, Silas. My own fertility makes me vulnerable. I can feel it in my quieter moments, thoughts that aren't quite mine, urges to secure my bloodline at any cost, paranoia about succession. Her hand clenched into a fist. I need someone at my side who can tell me when I'm being influenced. Someone who can see clearly when everyone else, including myself, is going blind. The weight of it settled over Silas like armor. Heavy but purposeful. You need a shield against your own nature. I need more than that. Eleanora moved closer, her intensity overwhelming in the confined space. I need someone who can identify which of my wolves have been compromised. Who can help me trace the bloodweave back to its source? Who can fight a war that no one else can even see? Her golden eyes held his. I need you, Silas Whittaker. Not despite your flaw but because of it. You're the only weapon that can cut through this curse. Before Silas could respond, a young guard appeared at the chamber entrance, breathless. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. But there's a messenger at the north gate. He bears the Whittaker seal and insists he'll only speak with. The guard's eyes flicked to Silas uncomfortably. With your companion. Eleanora's expression darkened. Name. He wouldn't give one, Your Majesty. But he matches the description of Ezra Dunham. Silas's blood went cold. His father. Here. Less than a day after being publicly humiliated and bought off. This should be interesting, Eleanora said, her voice deadly calm. Let's see what your father wants badly enough to crawl back to the castle that claimed his discarded son. They found Ezra in a private receiving room, pacing like a caged animal. He looked smaller than Silas remembered, diminished somehow, as if the act of selling his son had cost him more than just gold. But when he saw Silas enter with Eleanora, his expression shifted through a dozen calculations before settling on something that might have been paternal concern in better light. Silas. Ezra's voice was carefully measured. I'm glad to see you well. Came because I've been unfair to you. Cruel, even. Yes, Silas said flatly. You have. Ezra flinched but pressed on. I've spent the night consulting with healers, researchers, anyone who might help. And I found something. Cure, son. For your condition. He pulled a vial from his coat, filled with liquid that shimmered like captured starlight. One of the oldest remedies in existence. It could restore your fertility, make you whole again. Silas felt the pull of it immediately. Hope, treacherous and intoxicating. To be normal. To no longer carry the shame of his defect. What's the price? Eleanora asked, her voice cutting through Silas's thoughts like a blade through silk. Ezra's eyes slid to the queen, then back to his son. No price. Just conversation. I want to know why the queen chose you, Silas. What purpose you serve here. A father's curiosity about his son's new role, nothing more. His smile didn't reach his eyes. After all, if you're to be elevated, shouldn't your family understand why? We could be allies, help you navigate court politics. All I ask is that you share with me what the queen has told you. Her plans, her concerns, her... He paused delicately. Vulnerabilities. The vial caught the light, beautiful and poisonous. And Silas, standing in that room with his father's false concern and Eleanora's silent observation, finally understood the full depth of the war he'd been conscripted into. The bloodweave had already claimed his father. Those words, that offer, they weren't Ezra Dunham's desperate attempt at reconciliation. They were the curse itself, reaching out through his father's mouth, trying to find the one person who could see it clearly enough to destroy it. Silas looked at the vial, at his father's expectant face, at the trap laid so carefully before him. Then he met Eleanora's golden eyes and saw the question there. What will you choose? Keep your cure, father, Silas said quietly. I'm not broken. I'm exactly what she needs. Ezra's expression fractured, confusion and something darker flickering across his features. You're making a mistake, son. Without heirs, you're nothing. Don't let her use you. Get out, Silas said, and his voice carried an authority he didn't know he possessed. Before I tell the queen exactly why you're really here. As guards escorted his protesting father from the castle, Eleanora moved to stand beside Silas. The war just became personal, she said softly. Silas watched his father disappear through the gates, the vial of false hope clutched in his hand like a talisman against his own obsolescence. Good, Silas said. Personal wars are the ones worth winning. The night after Ezra's departure, Silas found Eleanora in the castle's highest tower, not in her throne room or war chamber, but in a small observatory that overlooked the kingdom. She'd removed her armor for the first time since he'd met her, wearing only a simple tunic and leather breeches. Without the steel and ceremony, she looked almost mortal. You're wondering if you made the right choice, she said without turning from the window. No. Silas moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I'm wondering why it felt like such an easy one. The moon painted her profile in silver light. Most men would have taken the cure. Fertility means status, power, legacy. Everything you've been taught to value. Most men weren't sold by their parents like livestock. Silas watched the distant lights of villages scattered across the dark landscape. Besides, the cure wasn't real. The moment I felt him offer it, I could sense the bloodweave threads wrapped around his words. Whatever was in that vial would have made me vulnerable to the curse. Eleanora turned to him then, and something in her expression cracked open. Not the queen but the woman beneath. You saw that. Already. The threads are everywhere once you know to look for them. Silas gestured to the kingdom below, connecting fertile wolves like a spider's web. My father was practically glowing with them. Whatever he's been told to do, he believes it completely. He paused. He probably thinks he's saving me. That's what makes the bloodweave so insidious, Eleanora said quietly. It doesn't feel like compulsion. It feels like destiny, like doing what's right for the pack. She was quiet for a moment then. I'm sorry that your father became a casualty of this war before you even knew there was a war. It was the gentleness in her voice that undid something in Silas's chest. He sold me, he said, the words rough. Before the curse, after the curse, it doesn't matter. He looked at his son and saw a transaction. That's not the bloodweave. That's just who he is. Maybe. Eleanora's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The touch was electric, unexpected. Or maybe the curse has been there so long we can't tell where it ends and people begin. Maybe that's why this war matters, Silas. Not just to save wolves from compulsion, but to find out who they actually are without it. Silas looked down at their joined hands. Who are you without it? I don't know yet. She smiled, sad and real. But I'd like to find out. With you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that transcended politics or strategy. This wasn't the queen claiming her weapon. This was Eleanora reaching for something she'd been denied by her own crowned choice. Connection. Someone who saw her as more than a vessel for the next generation of alphas. Your Majesty, Silas started. Eleanora, she interrupted. When it's just us, I'm Eleonora. Eleonora, he repeated, testing the intimacy of it. I need you to know something. I'm not just staying because I'm immune to the curse. I'm staying because when you look at me, you don't see what's missing. You see what's there. She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. And when I look at you, what do you see? Someone who's been fighting alone for too long, Silas said. Someone who needs. The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the observatory floor as 3 figures in black erupted through the opening, moving with the deadly precision of trained killers. Silas barely had time to register the gleam of silver blades before Eleonora shoved him aside, her body already shifting into defensive stance. But she was unarmed, unarmored, caught in the one moment she'd allowed herself to be vulnerable. The first assassin lunged. Eleonora twisted, catching his blade arm and breaking it with a sickening crack. But the second was already there, driving a dagger toward her exposed ribs. She blocked, but the third attacker swept her legs, sending her crashing to the stone floor. Silas's hand found silver bane at his belt. He'd taken to wearing it constantly, and he moved without thinking. The ancient blade sang as it left its sheath, meeting the descending strike meant for Eleonora's throat. The clash of steel rang through the tower. The assassin's eyes widened behind his mask, shocked that Silas had intercepted the killing blow. But shock gave way to calculation, and suddenly all 3 attackers shifted their focus. Not to finish Eleonora. To eliminate Silas first. They moved in concert, a coordinated assault that spoke of extensive training. Silas parried, dodged, his body responding with instincts he didn't know he possessed. Silverbane felt alive in his hand, guiding his movements, but he was 1 against 3 and they were professional killers. A blade opened a line across his shoulder. Another caught his thigh. Pain bloomed red and hot, but Silas kept his body between the assassins and Eleonora, even as she fought to regain her feet. Silas, move! Eleonora's voice, commanding even in crisis. But he couldn't. Moving meant exposing her, meant giving them a clear path to their target. So he stood his ground, Silverbane weaving a desperate defense, his blood painting the observatory floor. Then Eleonora was beside him, her hand closing around a fallen assassin's blade, and together they became something the attackers hadn't anticipated. Not queen and consort. Not warrior and liability. Partners. The fight ended in brutal efficiency. Eleonora's blade found the second assassin's heart. Silas's silver bane opened the third's throat. The first, his arm still broken, fled through the shattered window into the night. In the sudden silence, Silas and Eleonora stood surrounded by bodies and broken glass, both bleeding, both breathing hard. "You should have moved," Eleonora said, but her voice shook. "You should have let me. Let you die alone." Silas's laugh was edged with something wild. "That's not what partners do." She stared at him, this man who'd been declared worthless by his own family, who'd stood between her and death despite having no obligation to do so. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and desperate, tasting of blood and relief and something that felt dangerously like need. When they broke apart, her forehead rested against his. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Good," Silas said. "I'm tired of the way things were." Guards burst into the tower, weapons drawn, too late but finally present. In the chaos of securing the scene and tending wounds, no one noticed the small calling card left on one of the dead assassins. A card bearing the seal of Duke Caleb Mitchell. But Silas saw it. And as medics wrapped his injuries and Eleonora gave orders to her captains, he felt something crystallize inside him. He'd failed tonight. Failed to protect her because he'd been too slow, too untrained, too focused on surviving rather than eliminating threats. The realization settled into his bones like ice. Being immune to the blood weave wasn't enough. Seeing the threads wasn't enough. If he was going to stand at Eleonora's side in this war, he needed to become the weapon she'd claimed he was. And that meant learning to fight like one. Silas spent 3 days in the castle's war archives. Maps and ledgers spread before him like entrails waiting to be read. The wound on his shoulder throbbed with each movement, but pain sharpened his focus. Eleonora recovered in her chambers. The dagger wound in her side deep enough that even her alpha healing required time. Every hour she lay vulnerable fed the cold fury building in Silas's chest. Caleb Mitchell thought himself untouchable. A duke with centuries of lineage, protected by wealth and pack law. But Silas had something Caleb didn't. He could see the blood-weave threads connecting the duke to his network of influence, and more importantly, he could think without the curse-whispering ambitions of legacy and power into his thoughts. The first thread he pulled unraveled Caleb's Eastern holdings. A quiet word to the Queen's treasurer about irregularities in the Duke's mining contracts. Records that didn't quite match shipment weights. Silver flowing into Caleb's coffers from sources that couldn't bear scrutiny. Within 24 hours, royal auditors descended on the mines like carrion birds. The second thread connected Caleb to 3 border packs whose loyalty the Duke had purchased with promises of breeding rights to his superior bloodline. Silas sent anonymous letters to each pack, letters detailing how Caleb had promised the same privileges to all 3, playing them against each other. The alliances fractured overnight, dissolving into territorial disputes that would keep them occupied for months. The third thread led to Caleb's network of informants within Shadow Peak itself. Silas could see them now, marked by the subtle glow of blood, weave influence. Servants, minor nobles, even 2 guards who reported the Queen's movements. He didn't expose them. Instead, he fed them false information about Eleanora's recovery, about royal shipments and troop movements. Let Caleb make decisions based on lies. Let him commit resources to defending against threats that didn't exist. Each thread pulled, each careful dismantling, brought Silas closer to the Duke himself. And with each victory, he felt something dark and satisfying unfurl inside him. This was what he was good at. Not brute strength or breeding potential, but the patient, ruthless unraveling of an enemy's foundation until they stood on nothing but air. On the 4th day, Captain Thorne found him still bent over the war table. "The Queen is asking for you," she said, her scarred face neutral but her eyes carrying grudging respect. "She wants to know what you've been doing down here." Silas straightened, rolling his shoulders despite the pain. "Tell her I've been making Caleb Mitchell regret he ever learned my name." When he entered Eleanora's chambers, she was standing at the window despite the healer's protests, one hand pressed to her bandaged side. She turned at his approach, and something fierce sparked in her golden eyes when she saw him. "My spies tell me Duke Mitchell has lost control of his eastern territories. His border alliances have collapsed, and he's been chasing phantom threats for 3 days straight." Her lips curved. "Would you know anything about that?" "I would know everything about that," Silas said. "He tried to kill you. I'm making sure he pays for it." Eleanora moved toward him, her predator's grace undiminished by injury. "You're terrifying when you're angry. I find it extremely attractive." Before Silas could respond, urgent footsteps echoed in the corridor. A young messenger burst through the doors, breathing hard. "Your Majesty, Captain Thorne requests immediate presence in the war room. There's been an attack on the medical convoy." Silas's blood went cold. "What medical convoy?" "The one carrying supplies from the southern provinces," the messenger said. "Rare healing herbs for your Majesty's wound." The convoy was ambushed 20 miles south. Initial reports say it was the Thornridge pack, the ones who were supposed to purchase. He faltered, looking uncomfortable. The ones involved in the original transaction. The original buyers. The ones his parents had sold him to. Eleanora's hand found Silas's arm. "We'll send a regiment." "No." Silas's voice came out harder than he'd intended. "They're not just raiders looking for supplies. They came for me. Or rather, they came because I was taken from them, and they want compensation." In the war room, Captain Thorne had already assembled the intelligence. The Thornridge pack had positioned themselves along the convoy route with military precision, as if they'd known exactly when and where to strike. 6 guards dead, the healers captured, and a message left for the queen. A message written in blood on a torn banner. Return what was purchased, or we take payment in flesh. It's a trap, Captain Thorne said flatly. They want you to come to them. I know, Silas replied. That's why I'm going. Absolutely not. Eleonora's command voice filled the room. I won't send you into an obvious ambush. You're not sending me. Silas met her eyes, willing her to understand. I'm choosing to go. These people, this pack, they think I'm property they were cheated out of. And the person who made that deal, who negotiated my price and delivery. He paused, the realization settling over him like armor. Was my mother. The silence in the war room was absolute. Abigail Fairfax handled the Thornridge transaction personally, Silas continued. His voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. My father made the decision, but she negotiated the terms. She knew exactly what she was selling me into. And now she's leading them here. Probably promised them compensation if they disrupt your supply lines. Eleonora's expression darkened. Then we send a full battalion. Wipe them out completely. And confirm that I need an army to face my own mother. Silas shook his head. No. This is between the Thornridge pack and me. Between Abigail Fairfax and the son she tried to discard. If I'm going to stand at your side, if I'm going to be what you need me to be, I can't hide behind your soldiers every time my past comes calling. He turned to Captain Thorne. I'll need 20 riders. Volunteers only. Fast horses and light armor. We're not going to war. We're going to negotiate. Negotiate. Thorne's scarred eyebrow rose. With kidnappers and raiders. With people who think they're owed something. Silas felt the cold clarity of purpose settling over him. I'm going to explain why they're not. And if they don't listen. His hand moved to Silverbane at his belt. Then I'll explain it differently. Eleonora caught his arm as he turned to leave. Silas, this isn't about proving yourself to me. You've already done that. I know. He covered her hand with his own. This is about proving something to myself. That I'm not the broken thing my parents sold. That I'm not property to be traded or compensation to be claimed. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. I'll come back to you. I promise. You'd better, she whispered. Because if you don't, I'll march into whatever hell took you and drag you back myself. 2 hours later, Silas rode south with 20 of Shadowpeak's finest. The wind cold against his face and his mother's betrayal burning like ice in his chest. Somewhere ahead, in a camp of raiders and opportunists, Abigail Fairfax waited with the pack she'd sold him to. And Silas intended to teach them all a very painful lesson about the cost of underestimating the Queen's barren mate. The Thornridge camp sprawled across a rocky clearing like a festering wound, tents arranged in a defensive perimeter with guards posted at every approach. Silas counted 30 fighters, maybe more hidden in the trees. They'd chosen their position well. High ground, clear sightlines, natural escape routes. Someone with military training had planned this. That someone was his mother. Abigail Fairfax stood at the center of the camp beside a massive gray wolf who could only be the Thornridge Alpha. Scarred, battle-worn, radiating the kind of violence that came from surviving in the harshest territories. She looked exactly as Silas remembered. Elegant even in traveling leathers, her silver blonde hair pulled back severely. Her expression carved from ice and calculation. When she saw him approach with his small escort, something flickered across her face. Not maternal concern. Assessment. Like a merchant evaluating whether damaged goods might still have value. Silas. Her voice carried across the clearing, controlled and cold. I wondered if you'd come. Or if you'd hide behind your queen's skirts. Silas dismounted slowly, signaling his riders to hold position. 20 against 30 or more. Not impossible odds but not favorable. This wouldn't be won with steel. He walked forward alone, Silverbane at his hip, until he stood 10 paces from his mother and the Thornridge Alpha. You attacked a medical convoy, Silas said. Killed royal guards. Kidnapped healers carrying supplies for the queen. That's not just raiding. That's an act of war. The Thornridge Alpha growled, a sound that resonated in Silas's chest. You were promised to us. Paid for. The transaction was sealed before your queen interfered. We came to collect what's owed. I'm not owed to anyone. Silas kept his voice level, reasonable. The deal was illegal. Selling pack members without crown approval violates territorial law. You know this. The law protects valuable pack members, Abigail interjected smoothly. You were declared defective, rejected by your mate, and deemed unfit for the Whitaker line. Your father and I had every right to recoup our losses. There it was. The casual cruelty wrapped in legal justification. The reduction of her son to a failed investment. Something in Silas's chest twisted, but it wasn't the old shame. It was colder. Harper. You're right, he said, and watched his mother's eyes narrow in suspicion. Under pack law you had that right. But pack law also states that once purchased by the crown, all previous claims are void. The queen tripled your asking price. The debt was cleared. This, he gestured at the camp, the captured healers bound near the fire. This is just greed. The Thornridge Alpha stepped forward, his shadow swallowing Silas. Pretty words from a eunuch playing at being a consort. You think your queen's protection reaches this far south? You think she'll go to war over a barren mate she probably keeps as a pet? Silas felt the bloodweave threads pulsing around the Alpha, thick and corrupted. The curse had this wolf completely. Every word dripped with obsession over legacy, breeding rights, the primal need to dominate and propagate. And beside him his mother. Her threads fewer but present, twisted around her ambition like parasitic vines. They couldn't see the trap they'd walked into. Let me make you an offer, Silas said. Release the healers. Leave Shadow Peak territory. Never return. In exchange, I'll convince the Queen not to send the 300 soldiers currently mobilizing at the northern garrison to hunt you through these mountains until not a single Thornridge wolf remains. The Alpha laughed, a harsh bark. You're bluffing. There's no garrison. There is, Silas interrupted. Captain Thorne mobilized them the moment your raid was reported. They're a day's march from here. 2 days if the weather turns. He tilted his head, watching the Alpha's confidence waver. But you wouldn't know that because your scouts never made it back from their reconnaissance. 3 of them are in Shadow Peak's dungeons right now, very eager to avoid execution by sharing everything they know about your operations. That was a lie. There were no captured scouts. But the Alpha didn't know that, and doubt was a more powerful weapon than any blade. You're lying, Abigail said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Am I? Silas turned to face his mother fully. You taught me to read people, mother. To see the angles, the calculations. You think I came here with 20 riders because that's all I could muster? I came with 20 because that's all I needed to contain you while the real force approaches. You're not fighters, you're opportunists. And opportunists run when the odds turn against them. He could see it happening, see the threads of doubt spreading through the camp. Warriors exchanging glances, checking the tree line, reconsidering the wisdom of this ambush. The bloodweave made them aggressive, made them crave dominance, but it didn't make them stupid. Besides, Silas continued, his voice dropping to something colder, you made a mistake when you targeted that convoy. Those healers. One of them is the Queen's personal physician. The woman who's kept Eleonora alive through 3 assassination attempts. The woman who knows every secret of the royal bloodline. He met the Alpha's eyes. You think the Queen will negotiate when you've threatened the one person who can identify the bloodweave's influence on her? That convoy wasn't random. It was bait. And you swallowed it whole. The Thornridge Alpha's face darkened. You expect me to believe. I don't care what you believe, Silas said. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to release the healers, break camp, and disappear into your mountains. Or Captain Thorne arrives tomorrow with orders to make an example of you that will echo through every border territory for the next century. The silence stretched like a drawn blade. Then Abigail laughed, sharp and bitter. Impressive. You've learned to play the game well, Silas. Better than I gave you credit for. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. But you're still playing someone else's game. The Queen chose you for a reason, and it has nothing to do with love or loyalty. There's a curse, boy. An ancient one. The queens of Shadowpeak cannot bear children with fertile mates. The offspring always die, taking the mother with them. Every queen for 300 years has faced the same choice. Remain barren and rule, or breed and die. Silas felt the words land like physical blows, but he kept his expression neutral. If that's true, then she chose me because I'm the only mate who won't kill her by trying to give her heirs. That's not a curse, that's clarity. Or, Abigail whispered, she chose you because you're disposable. Because when the pressure to produce an heir becomes unbearable, she can discard you and claim it wasn't her choice. Her consort was defective all along. You're not her salvation, Silas. You're her excuse. The poison in those words was designed to burrow deep, to resurrect every insecurity his parents had carved into him. But Silas had spent weeks watching Eleonora, learning her patterns, seeing how she looked at him when she thought no one else noticed. The difference between you and her, Silas said quietly, is that she sees what I am. You only ever saw what I wasn't. He stepped back, raising his voice. Alpha, you have until sunrise to clear out. After that, I can't promise your survival. The Thornridge Alpha looked at Abigail, at his uncertain warriors, at the gathering darkness that could hide armies or nothing at all. Finally he growled his acceptance. Release the prisoners. We're leaving. Abigail's eyes blazed with fury, but she said nothing as the healers were cut free, as the Thornridge pack began breaking camp with a rushed efficiency of retreat. As Silas turned to walk back to his riders, she called out one last time. When she tires of you, don't say I didn't warn you. Silas didn't turn around. I'm not your son anymore, Mother. Your warnings mean nothing. He rode back to Shadowpeak with the freed healers, his 20 riders, and the knowledge that he'd won a battle without drawing Silverbane. Not through strength or breeding or any measure his parents valued. Through the very thing they'd taught him to see as worthless. His mind. But Abigail's words about the curse echoed in his thoughts through the long ride north, and when Shadowpeak's towers finally came into view against the dawn sky, Silas knew the next conversation with Eleonora would be the most dangerous yet. Because if what his mother said was true, then everything he'd started to believe about his place at the Queen's side was built on a foundation of royal necessity rather than genuine choice. And Silas needed to know which one it was before he let himself fall any deeper. The throne room of Shadowpeak had never been so full. Every noble house, every pack representative, every courtier and officer packed the vast chamber until the air itself felt compressed. Word had spread that Duke Caleb Mitchell was calling for a formal challenge, and the entire kingdom had come to watch the Queen's controversial consort defend his position, or be destroyed. Silas stood at the base of the dais where Eleonora sat enthroned, Silverbane at his hip. His posture deliberately calm despite the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. He'd asked her not to intervene, no matter what Caleb said. This needed to end here, in front of everyone, with absolute finality. Caleb strode through the parted crowd like a conqueror entering a surrendered city. His aristocratic features arranged in righteous indignation. Behind him came 3 physicians bearing the seal of the Royal Medical Council, their expressions grave and official. Your Majesty, Caleb's voice rang through the chamber, pitched for maximum dramatic impact. I come before you not as a rival, but as a concerned subject who can no longer stand silent while our kingdom's future is jeopardized. He turned to face the assembled court. For weeks, we've watched as the Queen elevates a man of questionable value. A man whose own family deemed him unworthy. And while loyalty is admirable, we cannot build a dynasty on sentiment alone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eleonora's expression remained neutral, but Silas saw her fingers tighten on the armrest of her throne. I have brought physicians, Caleb continued, gesturing to the 3 men behind him. The finest healers in the kingdom, who have examined the medical records of Silas Whittaker. And they have confirmed what his own family already knew. He is completely, irreversibly infertile. The murmurs exploded into shocked conversation. Nobles exchanged glances, whispers spreading like wildfire through dry brush. Caleb let it build, waiting for maximum effect before raising his hand for silence. "The queen requires an heir," he declared. "The kingdom requires continuity. And yet she has bound herself to a man who can never give her children. A man whose defect makes him worthless by any measure of pack law." His ice-blue eyes found Silas. "I call for his immediate removal and the selection of a proper consort. One who can fulfill the most basic duty expected of anyone who stands beside the throne." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in that throne room waited to see how Silas would respond, how the queen would defend her impossible choice. Silas stepped forward, his boots echoing on marble. "Duke Mitchell is correct," he said clearly, and the shock was palpable. "I am infertile, cannot sire children. By traditional measures of pack hierarchy, I am defective." He paused, letting the admission settle. "But the Duke has made a critical error. He assumes that the Queen's choice was made in ignorance, that she somehow overlooked my condition in a moment of weakness." He turned to face the assembled court, seeing them clearly now. Nobles glowing with blood-weave threads, their obsession with legacy and breeding making them vulnerable to the very curse they couldn't see. "The truth is far simpler," Silas continued. "The Queen chose me precisely because of my infertility. Because in this room, in this kingdom, there exists a curse so ancient and insidious that you've all forgotten it's there. A curse that feeds on your drive to breed, to propagate, to secure your bloodlines. It whispers in your thoughts, amplifies your ambitions, and turns your greatest strength into your greatest weakness." He could see Caleb's confidence wavering, see the Duke glance around as if suddenly aware of invisible eyes watching him. "The bloodweave," Silas said, and the name landed like a stone in still water. "An ancient curse woven into pack magic itself. For generations, it's been growing stronger, feeding on every fertile wolf's desire for legacy. It's why wars are fought over breeding rights instead of resources. Why alliances form and break over marriage contracts. Why the strongest wolves make increasingly reckless decisions, all in service to an obsession they believe is natural instinct." He moved to where one of the physicians stood, saw the man's threads pulsing with sickly light. "These physicians you brought. They're compromised. Look at them. Really look. The desperation in their eyes to see the queen breed with a proper mate isn't medical concern. It's the curse speaking through them." The physicians shifted uncomfortably, and Silas saw doubt spreading through the crowd like morning frost. "Duke Mitchell himself," Silas turned to face Caleb directly, "is so thoroughly infected with the blood weave that he can't understand why the queen would choose loyalty over lineage. His entire challenge is built on the curse's logic, that breeding potential is the only measure of worth. That legacy is all that matters." "Lies." Caleb's composure cracked. "You speak of curses and conspiracies to hide your own inadequacy." "Then let me prove it," Silas interrupted. He drew Silverbane, the ancient blade singing as it left its sheath. The blade that had been forged by the first queen of Shadowpeak, designed specifically to cut through magical corruption. He placed the flat of the blade against his own chest, then walked toward Caleb. "This weapon was made to reveal the bloodweave's influence. If I'm lying, if there's no curse, the blade will do nothing. But if I'm right..." He extended Silverbane toward the Duke. The moment the blade's edge caught the light near Caleb's body, the entire room gasped. Silver threads materialized in the air, visible to everyone now, wrapping around Caleb like chains. They pulsed and writhed, connecting him to dozens of nobles in the crowd, to the physicians, spreading through the throne room like a spider's web made manifest. "There," Silas said softly. "There is your curse. There is what's been controlling you, influencing your decisions, making you believe that the only thing that matters is who breeds with whom. Caleb staggered back, staring at the threads now visible on his own body, horror dawning on his aristocratic features. Around the room, nobles touched their own bodies, seeing for the first time the corruption they'd been carrying. The queens of Shadowpeak have known about this curse for 300 years, Silas continued, addressing the entire court now. They've known that any child born from a union with a fertile, compromised mate would be tainted by the bloodweave, would carry it stronger, spread it further. That's why every queen who tried to breed with traditional consorts died. The curse killed them to prevent its own exposure. He turned back to Eleonora, who rose from her throne with terrible grace. The queen didn't choose me despite my infertility, Silas said. She chose me because I'm immune to the curse. Because I can see it, fight it, and help her burn it out of this kingdom root by root. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in creating the next generation. It's in saving this one. Eleonora descended the dais steps, her armor catching torchlight, her golden eyes blazing with fierce pride. She took silver bane from Silas's hand and held it high. Silas Whittaker speaks the truth. Her voice filled the chamber like thunder. For too long we have been slaves to biology, to the tyranny of legacy. But no longer. She turned the blade, pressing the flat against her own chest, and more threads became visible. Fewer than Caleb's but present. Even I am not immune. Even I have felt the curse's pull, whispering that I must produce an heir at any cost. She lowered the blade, her gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles. That is why I chose him. Not as a temporary solution, not as an excuse, but as my partner in the most important war this kingdom has ever faced. The war for our own minds. Eleonora sheathed silver bane and took Silas's hand, pulling him up the dais steps to stand beside her throne. I name him not just consort but king. Not because of what he can give me in children, but because of what he gives me in clarity, in loyalty, in the courage to choose a different kind of legacy. She produced a crown, not ornate but simple and strong, wrought from the same silver as silverbane. The bloodweave wants us to value breeding above all else. I choose to value this. She placed the crown on Silas's head. A partnership built on choice, not compulsion. On seeing each other clearly, not through the distortion of a curse. The throne room erupted. Some in cheers, others in protest, but all in recognition that something fundamental had shifted in their kingdom. Caleb Mitchell stood frozen, staring at the threads still visible on his body. His challenge reduced to ash. And Silas, wearing a crown he'd never imagined deserving, stood beside Eleonora and felt something he'd never experienced before. Belonging. Purpose. That night, as they stood together on the observatory balcony, the same place they'd first almost died together, Eleonora traced her fingers along Silas's arm. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. You could have had a cure. A normal life. Children of your own, perhaps somewhere else. I'm sure, Silas said. This is where I'm meant to be. As if in answer, a warmth bloomed where her fingers touched his skin. Silas looked down and watched in amazement as silver markings spread across his forearm. Not the corrupted threads of the bloodweave, but something else entirely. Runes in an ancient language, glowing with pure light, forming patterns that matched the ones etched on Silverbane's blade. Eleonora gasped, pulling back her own sleeve. Identical marks appeared on her arm, mirroring his perfectly. What is this? Silas breathed. I don't know, Eleonora whispered, but wonder filled her voice. It's not a mate bond. Those only form between fertile pairs. This is something else. Something older. The marks pulsed in unison, and Silas felt it. A connection deeper than blood, stronger than any curse. Not the biological imperative of the bloodweave, but a union of choice and shared purpose. A bond forged not by nature's mandate, but by two people who had chosen each other despite everything the world said they should be. The first queen who forged Silverbane, Eleonora said slowly, realization dawning. The histories say she had a protector who stood at her side. They called him the Unbound King, A man who couldn't be controlled by pack magic because he had no wolf to bind. They were the first to fight the Bloodweave. And they won? Silas asked. They disappeared, Eleonora said. The histories don't say why. But they left behind the blade, and the prophecy that when the curse returned, so too would the bond between queen and unbound king. The marks on their arms flared brighter, settling into permanent patterns that would never fade. Silas looked at Eleonora, at this woman who had seen him as whole when everyone else saw him as broken, and smiled. Then I suppose we have work to do. We do, Eleonora agreed, and in her golden eyes, Silas saw not just a queen but a partner. An equal. The other half of something that had been waiting 300 years to reform. Below them, Shadow Peak spread out in the moonlight, a kingdom infected with an ancient curse but now armed with an ancient answer. And on the balcony, two people who had been called defective, impossible, worthless, stood marked by power older than any bloodline, ready to rewrite what legacy could mean. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?